The name comes from a sprawling package of policies and projects put in place in the 1930s to lift the country out of the Great Depression. We're talking infrastructure investments, federal jobs programs, even Social Security.
And we are conserving not only our natural resources, but also our human resources.
Fast forward to today. The world's facing an even bigger crisis, and a handful of politicians are asking, does America need a New Deal, but for climate change?
We can only do it if we come together and embark upon an ambitious legislation known as the Green New Deal.
Not only is this something that is going to help our planet, but also put food on the table.
It's about growing this economy and protecting our families by reducing greenhouse gases.
A Green New Deal sounds nice, but what does it mean? One progressive think tank broke it down into 3 basic building blocks. This is the green part of the Green New Deal. We're talking targets like 100% renewables, zero emissions, and cutting local pollution. Here's the New Deal part of the Green New Deal. This could mean job training or incentives to boost the clean energy sector. It could even go as far as a green jobs guarantee for anyone who wants one. The deal would prioritize communities most exposed to climate change and pollution. That would also involve looking at labor standards, fair wages, and benefits. It helps to think of the Green New Deal not as a policy, but a framework. And any politician who signs up on the idea could come up with their own policies and targets to make those broad goals real. It's ambitious, so why are people talking about it right now? The New Deal came out of the Great Depression. Today, the overall economy is in a much different place than it was in the 30s, but not everyone's benefiting from that growth.
Yeah, look, the Great Recession and this new generation of young people who came up in it, we realized how dangerous this moment is, and then also marginal kind of policies just aren't going to cut it anymore as we're watching the acceleration of climate change.
And if you thought the Great Recession was a crisis, climate change is potentially a whole new level of frightening. Even moderate climate policies have died in Congress or been frozen in legal limbo. So the Green New Deal's no small lift. But polling does suggest some public appetite for environmental policies and a jobs guarantee.
Yeah, we're going to be actually going through the whole document to kind of look at what it's, what it's proposing. We're going to, think about, how realistic is it? How could this possibly work? Because as it said in the video, it's more of a framework. It's the document itself is only 14 pages long. It's pretty broad. It doesn't really go into too much detail as far as how all of this is going to happen. So as this video that we just shown, he explained that it's going to be up to other Congress people to kind of fill in the gaps. Like, one person will, there'll be a group that's working on one particular part of it, like let's say getting, giving people jobs.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party recently proposed a Green New Deal to address climate change, which a United Nations intergovernmental panel of scientists says will be catastrophic unless humans take action in the next decade. Some of the stated goals of the Green New Deal include promoting clean infrastructure projects and jobs, ensuring that all energy consumed in the U.S. comes from renewable sources by 2035, restoring public and private lands, expanding sustainable farming and soil, and decarbonizing the economy. Jimmy, what are your overall thoughts on the Green New Deal?
Well, the Green New Deal is great. I wish it would have happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We're getting down to the wire. In fact, it's not looking good for the planet, put it that way, or our survival on the planet. As George Carlin pointed out, the planet's going to be fine. It's us who are going to get killed. So I'm all for the Green New Deal. I haven't heard anybody who say they aren't for a Green New Deal who doesn't work for an oil company. But we need it. We need it desperately. We need it now.
When it comes to funding the Green New Deal, Data for Progress says we continually spend money on things that are historically or increasingly unpopular, including over $4 billion per year on fossil fuel subsidies, $1.5 trillion on Trump's 2017 tax cuts, and over $1.6 trillion on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The report says instead of spending millions on wars in other countries or on tax breaks that don't trickle down, investments in American communities actually make life better, the environment cleaner, communities more resilient, and economies more stable. What do you think about diverting money from wars and tax breaks for the wealthy to funding a Green New Deal?
Boy, then what would happen to all our wars? Okay. Listen, what people don't understand is just how much we're spending on the military. We are spending in the United States, we had a 40% increase in our military budget since the height of the Iraq War. 40% increase in our military budget. Think about that. What else has gotten a 40%? We went from $500 billion to over $700 billion. And just imagine what you could do with those $200 billion. Well, you could maybe fund a Green New Deal. You could help get us off fossil fuel. You can invest in clean energy. So yes, should that happen? It not only could happen, it should happen. And you know, we're outspending. First of all, right now in the United States, we're outspending, I think, the next 13 countries combined in military output. And we don't really have an enemy out there. People say Russia is the enemy of the United States. Russia spends somewhere around $65 billion a year on their military. We spend 716. So it sounds like the military...
I can agree there that with all the money that we spend, almost $1 trillion on military every year, I agree. That's a lot of money that you could use for better things. Like, for example, Corey lives in Flint, Michigan. Like, why haven't they fixed the water there, right? But also, I don't necessarily think that since we're spending $700 billion a military, that okay, we'll just take $200 billion from that to put somewhere else. I think there should be a more concerted effort to just reduce spending as much as possible, because we are, in fact, $21 trillion in debt. And many economists say that, if we keep spending and spending and spending, we're going to have another Great Depression, we're going to have hyperinflation, and then, we'll all be screwed.
The industrial complex has captured our Congress. And in order to get a Green New Deal, we're going to have to break that.
Ocasio-Cortez's draft resolution titled "On the Select Committee for a Green New Deal" says to reduce taxpayer burden, the majority of funding will be accomplished by the federal government using a combination of the Federal Reserve, a new public bank or system of public banks, and public venture funds. Any interest or investment returns generated by the public will then be returned to the Treasury. Public banks are established by cities and states rather than private interests. They collect deposits from government entities, school districts, and state infrastructure funds, and then they use that money to fund projects that the public wants on things like a Green New Deal. What do you think about funding the Green New Deal with public banks?
I think it would be fantastic. Again, we need to have more public banks in the United States. We don't even have, we had it on the ballot here in Los Angeles, where I'm at, to have a public bank, and they voted it down. Why? Because the banks, the for-profit commercial banks, spent money and confused people, right? And so they're the equivalent of the tobacco industry saying that the science isn't clear on whether it causes cancer. So we know public banks work. We know we need public banks, yet we don't have them. Why? It's because of the corporate capture of our government. And that would be a great way to not only fund the Green New Deal, but you could fund lots and lots of things through public banks.
Plan of their own to tackle the issue. It includes creating a select committee on the climate crisis to study, investigate, and develop policies to permanently reduce pollution and other contributing factors. The panel lacks most of the key features of the Green New Deal, like banning lawmakers who take fossil fuel money from sitting on the panel. Instead of outright adopting the proposed progressive policy, House Dems say their plans will be inspired by the Green New Deal. Why not just adopt the...
So, again, that highlights that it seems like the Democratic Party is slightly fracturing a little bit more. Since Bernie had run for president, now there's more of like a what they call progressive. I consider more like kind of like socialist, left wing kind of sect of the Democratic Party, and again, Republican and Democratic parties are not really that different as a whole, because they all are for war. They all take money from Goldman Sachs and special interests and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that they actually do agree on. It's things like climate change and you know, abortion that, you know, their respective bases, I guess, feel strongly enough about, or their special interests feel strongly enough about, that they differ on those things. So the thing here is that Schumer and Pelosi, they kind of you know, they're kind of a little bit of at odds with AOC. Pelosi was quoted as saying, like, oh, the Green New Dream or whatever it's called, acting like, you know, being very dismissive, acting like, you know, she didn't even know what it was, even though it's like all over the news. So
the Green New Deal, why create one inspired by it? What's the why?
Again, because the Speaker of the House is compromised, Nancy Pelosi is compromised, the Democratic Party is compromised by corporate cash, and that's the only reason. Why would you put people on a committee for a Green New Deal and then let them be totally influenced by the fossil fuel industry? Why are you letting the problem try to fix be the solution? The problem isn't the solution. So again, that's why we have these incremental approaches to this problem, and we're never going to get a solution until we get a solution to the problem of money in politics.
Now, we can't talk about any U.S. government-sponsored plan to combat climate change without questioning the role of our own military in environmental issues. The U.S. military is one of the worst polluters in the world, and many of the wars it gets involved in are about oil. We tend to think about our military as only harming people in battle zones overseas. But last year, the Department of Defense allowed a media outlet to see its internal environmental impact database for the first time. The database tracks the DoD's Quiet Environmental Restoration Program. The ProPublica report revealed for the first time how the military spends over $1 billion per year cleaning up 39,000 sites that its operations have contaminated with toxic waste and explosives. These sites are in every American state and territory, and a map of the data places them in nearly every American's backyard, next to schools, rivers, lakes, and residential neighborhoods. Jimmy, how much success are House Democrats going to have with their environmental protection plan if they don't also work on curbing American militarism?
Well, I mean, that's the big problem. I don't know how successful. Doesn't look like they're going to be very successful, right?
So, you know, Corey says, you know, AOC or Pelosi, who's going to win that? How is AOC going to even get it through if her party doesn't support her idea? Here's the thing. The military-industrial complex is the biggest special interest there is. Yeah, military. This is probably old information because this is actually 700-something billion. Oh, this is 2015. That's right. Yeah, so since 2015, it's gone up like 100-something billion. So, yeah. So in 2015, United States government had 1.1 trillion of discretionary spending. Over half of that, 53%, was the military. Now it's probably bigger because it's 700 billion now, so this probably took a bigger chunk. This is, I bring this up all the time because it's important. We're $21 trillion in debt. Debt per citizen, that's $66,000. Debt per taxpayer, $179,000. So the more the government spends, the more we're in debt, the more we are vulnerable to getting bought out by the Chinese, vulnerable to an economic crash, things like that. So one troubling thing about, the naming of it, the Green New Deal, right? But that kind of goes on the presumption that the New Deal was a great, fabulous thing that helped us get out of the Great Depression, but that's not something that everybody is in consensus about. It's not something that everybody agrees with. For example, this is an article here from UCLA from 2004. It says FDR's policies prolonged depression by 7 years. UCLA economists calculate. Says 2 UCLA economists say that they have figured out why the Great Depression dragged on for almost 15 years, and they blame a suspect previously thought to be beyond reproach, FDR. After scrutinizing Roosevelt's record for 4 years, they concluded in a new study that New Deal policies signed into law 71 years ago thwarted economic recovery for 7 long years. So they're saying that in 8 years it could have been over, but it dragged on for almost 15, right? So why the Great Depression lasted so long has always been a great mystery. And because we never really knew the reason, we have always worried whether we would have another 10 to 15 year slump. And it goes on here. So President Roosevelt believed that excessive competition was responsible for the Depression. So he came up with a recovery package. You know, he spent a lot of government money to put people to work, gave people jobs, like, you know, like digging holes and filling them back up again. Maybe not literally that, but that was kind of like the saying. But that's just to show that, you know, it's not conclusive that the New Deal was great for our country. A lot of things that are in history, it's like, oh yeah, it's everybody knows that this was great. Everybody knows that that was great, you know, hands down. Like, for example, you know, in history, we're taught that, you know, Abraham Lincoln was like so great for freeing the slaves, but, you know, they ignore other things like him repressing the media, you know, basically consolidating the federal government, taking power away from the states, which, you know, the country was founded as a republic. It's not a democracy, it's a republic. The states are supposed to have more power than the federal government. So Lincoln ended that. He also was a racist himself. He, you know, said himself that he didn't really care about black people or anything like that. So all throughout history, I mean, even Martin Luther King, like, cheated on his wife and stuff. Like, the thing is, like, the history books like to paint this glorious picture, at least you know, in regular schooling. Like, you go to elementary school, you go to middle school, high school, they kind of give you like the, I don't know, like the plain, you know, like sugar-coated history. What I think it is that, you know, the complexities of history, they're not taught to us because it's in the best interest of government and the people who run the government to have all of its citizens believe in the government. If the citizens do not believe in the government, then the government is useless. It's worthless. You know, there is no government. The government is the people. So in order for the government to get support and get power, the people have to believe in the government. They have to keep paying taxes. You know, they gotta not, you know, get in their way or whatever. You know, they don't want people protesting and things like that. That makes things more difficult for the government. Unless it's a protest that meets their agenda or something like that. But it's also that if you present a complex picture of history, that means you have to actually think. You have to actually critically think about what happened and all the different factors of it. You know, so that's why it's good to hear different opinions and different perspectives, because more and more nowadays, you know, we're fed a specific line, a specific viewpoint, and it's just pushed and pushed, and, you know, the media doubles down, you know, politicians double down, and it's gotten to the point where you can say whatever you want, and, like, there's so much control with the media that they can just spin it right around and people just forget about it the next week. So they can, you know, a news organization can come out and lie, put out a false report, or like a report that hasn't been fully vetted, that hasn't been fully researched. They can get caught putting out false information, and then, you know, they can just apologize or whatever, but then people don't remember the apology. They don't remember the retraction. You know, just about every news organization has been caught putting out false information and then having to retract information, because reporters don't really do much investigation anymore. They just get their news from like one central source, then they just repeat it.
In consumer news, economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year. Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter.
You get the point. So it's like, how is it that all these different news outlets are saying the exact same thing? And it happens a lot in media, sometimes saying the exact same thing, sometimes just picking up certain talking points, which are just like little phrases or whatever that, you know, kind of just stick in your mind, you know. And it's a way to program people into thinking a certain way. So it's dangerous when you have a lot of the media outlets saying the same thing. There should be some debate. There should be some critical thinking. There should be some individual thinking.
Now this is a good one. What are your thoughts on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's new Green Deal?
Well, the easiest answer for that is I don't like it. I can't believe there's going to be anything in there worthwhile. But she may well be pointing out some things that are very important. I think we're facing a crisis today, and it's given some license to these wild-eyed progressive socialists to get their views out, and that is the discrepancy in wealth distribution, because it's not normal for a free market, and for the free market's getting blamed for all the problems that we have today. There are too many billionaires, and they're growing by leaps and bounds, and the poor aren't doing well, and there is a discrepancy. So they have that one point, and she plays on this, but she comes up with the wrong conclusion. The conclusion is, well, we need more government to distribute that wealth, and therefore we have to raise more taxes. She doesn't really want to listen to you when you explain to her that the wealthy 1% pay a tax equivalent to the lower 90%. So how are you going to keep taxing and solve these problems? But there is a maldistribution on wealth. And it's not a consequence of too much free markets. It's a consequence of corporatism, welfareism, of inflationism, and the Federal Reserve System, because this invites these kind of problems. And the radical environmentalists will use this for making everything fair. You know, equality sounds good, but equality should be limited to equality of justice, not economic equality where everybody has the same amount. It just doesn't work, because when you do that, you end up with less for everybody. You get more equality, but it's always by lowering the welfare of everybody. So this goal has to be to get people to understand why free markets are the answer, and that you can't just radicalize it by saying, well, just tax the wealthy, and it's the environment that we have to take care of, and we're going to you just write more rules and regulations. Otherwise, the world's going to end in 12 years. And I think one of the things that people should do when these get outrageous, and even some of the Democrats are going after her as well, because she's so out of it. Cortez is just saying anything. So I think a little bit of laughter sometimes can do as much as trying to reason with a person like this. But she has an audience. It's going to continue to grow, and unless we're able to present the cause of liberty and free markets and get people to understand it from a moral viewpoint, she's going to continue to build her audience. But quite frankly, though there are problems out there that she's identified, I think her solutions are just outlandish, and hopefully we can persuade people to go in a different direction.
Let's hope so. Well, let's move on to number 2 now, if we can.
All right, so basically, you know, Ron Paul, he ran for president. He's has been in Congress for, you know, a long time, and his son Rand Paul is in Congress as well. He's probably the one politician that whose ideals match mine the most. I do believe in freedom, and I do believe that a lot of the wealth inequality in our country is due to corporatism and welfarism, not necessarily welfare of poor people, but of corporations that are allowed to park their, park money overseas, and they get tax breaks. Netflix posted biggest ever profit in 2018 and paid $0 in taxes. This is from February 5th, 5 days ago. The popular video streaming service Netflix posted its largest ever U.S. profit in 2018, $845 million, on which it didn't pay a dime in federal or state income taxes. In fact, the company reported a $22 million federal tax rebate. So the only taxes they ended up paying were foreign taxes. And so this isn't something new. This isn't something that, is just Trump or whatever. Like, for the longest time, corporations have been given all these tax breaks, all these, Obama even gave them incentives to move their companies overseas. I don't know why. But, there's a lot of things behind the scenes with these special interests that, they fund politicians, they fund the media. A lot of the inequality is due to them, and if we just use existing like antitrust laws and maybe enhance certain things, we can basically, the government just needs to do its job, okay? And there needs to be more accountability in our government, so that we're not letting just corporations do whatever they want. President Trump says, when you hear sources say, don't believe it. Well, I mean, in general, it's not a good idea to, it's a good idea to verify your sources. So if you get an anonymous source, like that BuzzFeed article that was in the news before the Covington thing, BuzzFeed was caught basically putting out false information that Robert Mueller, the guy who's in charge of the investigation against Trump, actually came out and said, no, that's wrong. And then conveniently, the whole Covington thing took over the news cycle, and everybody forgot about that. She has a fan base. She does have a huge fan base, but I think a lot of that is sadly, it's due to her being attractive, young, and non-white. I think those are big factors in why she's so popular, because some of the things she says just sounds dumb as hell, and then some of the stuff she says does sound like it makes sense. So here's a couple articles that because climate change is another one of those things that's like, oh, this is for sure happening. You can't disagree with it. But the thing is, like, I don't know any climate scientists. I'm not a climate scientist, so I'm not the authority on this. But I think it's healthy to have some kind of skepticism when something is just, promoted so much, and where you can see that people have a lot to gain. For example, Al Gore, he pretty much started this whole movement, right? But then, he has multiple mansions, he flies on private jets. His carbon footprint is a lot larger than, most people's whole families, and he's invested a lot in the renewable energy and stuff like that, which, by the way, I do believe we need to move away from fossil fuels. I do. But I also don't think that, if you've got people that are, saying extreme things so that they can make money, Al Gore has a lot of investments in renewable energy, and he's been making a lot of money off of this whole thing. But not everybody agrees with this. Here's a Forbes article. 97% of climate scientists agree. That's 100% wrong according to this article. Usually the person will have a vague answer like climate change is real. And the thing is, like, they went from, okay, so they used to say global cooling was what was happening, like, I don't know, in the 70s or something like that. Then it became global warming, and now they say climate change. I mean, climate change, climate change happens. It's the seasons, you know, climate does change. So it's such a broad term that, you know, it's hard to refute, I think. So I think that's what they're talking about here. What is that supposed to mean? That climate changes, that we have some impact, that we have a large impact, that we have a catastrophically large impact? So what you'll find is that people don't want to define what 97% agree on. So it's like another buzzword. It's like, hey, if you don't agree with this, you're an idiot, or you're stupid, or you don't know what you're talking about. So I get skeptical when there's things like that where people say, hey, don't disagree with this. Don't disagree with Lincoln being a god. Don't disagree with MLK being perfect. Don't disagree with JFK being perfect. Because nothing is perfect. So while there is a huge issue with pollution in our planet, especially with China. Like, if you look at China, how much pollution they spew out. You know, they got smog, and oh my gosh, like, you know, let's take a brief look at what's going on in China. Like, you can't even see. Look at this. You can't even see.
Yeah. That's the guy who we rely on to do our camera work. That ape.
City of Linfen, and spending about a day here breathing in the air is about the same as smoking 3 packs of cigarettes. The scary part is that there's a lot of cities in China like this. 16 of the world's 20 most polluted cities are in China. And my bosses convinced me to come here and
16 of the 20 most polluted cities on the planet are in China?
Spend a week filming and breathing in all this crap so they didn't have to.
It's crazy. You can't even see. This music is not copyrighted. Most polluted city on earth. Oh my god. Yo, you can't see anything. Toxic wind. So yes, this is not good. I'm not for this. You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, fossil fuels aren't going to last forever. You know, fracking does horrible things to the environment. You know, we do need to move away from fossil fuels. Here's one global warming study nobody wants to see. This is from April 25th, 2018, investors.com. A new study published in a peer-reviewed journal finds that climate models exaggerate the global warming from CO2 emissions by as much as 45%. If these findings hold true, it's huge news. So, I mean, the argument isn't that there's a lot of pollution. The argument against climate change is that, you know, to what level does, you know, to what degree does man-made pollution cause global warming? So just in essence, like, I gotta say, I don't know. I don't know how true that is, because the people that push this agenda of, like, you know, this climate change agenda, their solutions for it always involve more government. And that's not really something I'm a fan of, because the government tends to mismanage money. They tend to favor special interests. So if we didn't have things like the Federal Reserve and other things that, you know, tax breaks for corporations, I think the playing field would be a lot more leveled. Okay, so this is the document right here. This is the full document for the Green New Deal. Submitted by Ocasio-Cortez. All right, so the basis for the argument is on an October 2018 report entitled Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 Celsius. I haven't read that report. I probably should read that report. By the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the November 2018 Fourth National Climate Assessment Report. Okay, so these reports found that human activity is the dominant cause of observed climate change over the past century, and that a changing climate is causing sea levels to rise and an increase in wildfires, which by the way, you know, the wildfires, right? The recent wildfires, a lot of people are saying that it's, you know, the state of California didn't do enough to prevent the wildfires. But we have had more severe storms, it would seem, especially in the Pacific, you know, like Japan and stuff like that. They get a lot of tsunamis, more and more tsunamis, and I think there's been more hurricane activity as well on our side of the globe. So there's definitely some, you know, there might be some kind of changes happening, but I'm not personally convinced that it's climate change, like man-made climate change, or is it like cycles of the earth, because the earth has different cycles, the sun has different cycles, and that's one thing that, you know, they don't bring up when they talk about global warming or climate change, that the sun has different cycles. What is this?
Teeming with codfish and seals. Late in the 10th century, the Vikings settled in Greenland. They found fertile fields and navigable waters teeming with codfish and seals. Generations had come to call this land their home.
At the first they were farmers and settled on the large land, and they must have been very thrilled with the land they found.
Back then it was warmer, there was more trees, it was a very good farming land. Very fertile, very green.
Rumors of this wonderful land must have spread, so you had more inhabitants. We think of this as a rough life, but they have had fashionable clothing and they have had time to play. It's been tough, but they have had good times as well.
The Viking communities in Greenland were vibrant and thriving by the year 1100. Within a few hundred years, they were all wiped out. The reason? Climate change.
The climate changed. That's a fact. Everybody knows that. So it was getting very hard to be a farmer. And, well, they didn't get enough hay for the animals. And the animals were freezing and starving, so the animals died. And when the animals die, the people die.
Around the year 1350, representative of the bishopric Garda visited Western settlement, and he wrote home and told that there's no one here.
By the end of the 15th century, Greenland had grown so cold that all of the Viking people who had lived there for generations were completely gone.
They must have wondered, what happened to our climate system? I mean, did we do something to cause this? That would be really, really useful to learn from the Vikings' example. How do we go about coping with big natural changes in the sun and the earth climate system?
How do humans cope with natural changes in the climate system? As scientists study the past, they're applying this knowledge to the changes experienced in the Earth's climate today. They are finding a natural cycle that modulates between cold periods and warm periods.
Climate is not a constant. We go through periods where it's much warmer,
where it's much colder. We go through periods where it's wetter and drier. So the one thing we can say about climate in the future is that it will change.
As Greenland became cooler, other parts of the world were experiencing this cool down as well. In England, the Thames River began to freeze over during harsh winters. So did canals and waterways in the Netherlands. The Earth's climate was entering what scientists now call the Little Ice Age.
Condition is quite severe. In Western Europe, you can see people were actually praying in a church while the glacier is advancing. Essentially are praying that, please, God, don't let this ice coming and then ruin our village.
The Little Ice Age is part of a series of climate change eras that have been scientifically identified. In Europe, there was a warming period at the height of the Roman Empire, followed by cooling during the Dark Ages. The climate again warmed during the medieval period, followed by the Little Ice Age during the Renaissance.
The Little Ice Age ended at about 1850. So over the past 150 or so years, we've been in a cycle where the Earth has generally been warming.
This current climate cycle is what most people call global warming. Scientists have identified the recurring patterns of cooling and heating in the Earth's climate. But what causes this cycle?
The sun is the key ingredient to climate. I mean, 99.9% of the energy on the Earth that goes into the climate system comes from the sun.
The sun, of course, in terms of its light energy output, is probably the only true external driver of the Earth climate system, because there is no other forces on Earth that would supply that amount of energy for the air to move around, the ocean current to move around, or trees to grow. So there is no doubt that the sun is the main driver and supplier of energy to the Earth weather and climate system.
The sun's magnetism has a profound effect on the Earth. The sun's magnetic fields experience regular natural cycles. Sound familiar? When sunspot activity is compared to temperature changes over the same period, a remarkable correlation appears. Radiation from the sun seems to contribute to variations in temperature and climate on Earth. This is important when trying to understand climate patterns. The sun's natural cycles are a primary driver of our climate's natural cycles.
You have such a strong indication that there is this close relationship between how much the energy output from the sun changes and then how much the temperature changes.
What about the role that carbon dioxide, or CO2, plays in the Earth's climate? Is the warming being caused by human-generated carbon dioxide? Is it the sun? Or is it a combination of factors?
Humans do affect our environment, and one of the ways they do that is change the constituents in the atmosphere. I think the biggest driver is going to be other natural fluctuations, and carbon dioxide plays a small role in that.
The modern warming of Greenland has been going on since 1850, long before human-generated CO2 was entering the atmosphere. Looking at modern warming in general, a consistent pattern can be seen. With the best available records of temperature and atmospheric CO2 of the past 650,000 years, one finds that the Earth's temperature always rises first, followed by a rise in carbon dioxide.
A warmer Earth gives birth to more vegetation, which in turn has a more active carbon cycle. And so as a result, carbon dioxide may in fact follow the temperature change as opposed to being a leading indicator.
Published papers clearly shows that it is always the temperature rises first by at least several hundred years to a few thousand years. And then the carbon dioxide curve responds and it follows. So it is a very clear scientific consensus on this issue.
In other words, a warmer Earth leads to increased CO2 levels, not the other way around. That's an important realization, given the increased focus on human-generated CO2.
Most of us still have that nagging question in us, Yes, we have emitted all this carbon dioxide. Are we really melting all the ice cap? Or is it something even more powerful than that? Meaning that could it be even the sun actually is doing it?
The world's oceans offer another example. They contain large amounts of carbon dioxide. When the oceans heat up, That CO2 is released into the atmosphere.
If you started to warm the surface ocean temperature, the ability for the ocean water to hold this carbon dioxide in the system is a lot less, meaning there will be more of this carbon dioxide effusing out.
All of these theories are being explored by scientists to fully understand the complex factors that influence climate. However, the current political landscape endorses just one theory, that human-generated CO2 is the principal cause of global warming.
Those views are indeed promoted by political bodies, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and there appears to be a corrupted process, in my opinion, of the bodies, where I think science and scientists are being misused in a lot of ways. And these are all becoming really a war of words instead of war of evidence and science that troubles me.
There's a science document, which is really written by scientists for scientists. There's also a summary for policymakers. It's put together by policymakers, and in many cases, they go back to the scientists and say, can you change the science document to match our summary? We want to beef this up. We want to make it look worse. That's not the way science is done.
They are clearly promoting the vision that if we do not cut our carbon dioxide emission, disaster, crisis, whichever bad connotation you can find, will come to Earth. So it is that kind of alarmism that appalls me as a scientist.
What we have to remember is climate changes and climate fluctuates. And really, while we think humans have an impact on our environment, which we do, the global climate system is still far too complex to be simply affected by one change in one small component of it.
There is no one in the world who would insist that everything is having to do with the sun. All we are trying to do is that there's this plausible picture of how the sun could cause some of the changes in the climate system, and why not study it carefully? It's very, very difficult, in my opinion, to try to insist and suggest that carbon dioxide, even as of today, when we emit this carbon dioxide, is going to drive the climate system. It's a complete false picture, and there's no such scientific basis to support that.
So the idea of science is you're really supposed to be skeptical. So there's always a quest to verify what we know, to understand that we haven't made a mistake, and that we continue on and develop science. And if we've closed our mind, if we close the doors, we are now shutting ourselves out from the real truth, which is what science is all about after all.
There is still much to learn about the many ways in which solar activity, the oceans, and other environmental variations may influence the Earth's climate. But the more scientists are allowed to do their research in an open dialogue, the more they will understand what is truly affecting the Earth's warming today.
Yeah, so, and I appreciate you, Corey. Thank you very much. Yeah, so the video brings up that it's become more of a political issue than a scientific issue. As you said, you know, the whole idea behind science is to be skeptical, to check theories. You know how many scientific theories have been debunked, and it was popular thought that the Earth was flat, and there's that everything revolved around the Earth. The science gets debunked all the time, so it's kind of arrogant to say, like, oh yeah, this is official truth. Like, there's so many different factors. Like, you telling me that you know everything about the sun, everything about the magnetic waves, everything about all these different factors, and then you just say, like, oh, it's the carbon emissions. That's what it is. Well, here's my perspective. It's that, they focus on that because carbon can be taxed. Carbon is carbon is the basis for all life. We exhale carbon dioxide. It wouldn't be far-fetched to say that, we could be taxed on the air we breathe. And also the video pointed out that, plants, they eat the carbon to produce oxygen. So carbon is necessary. It's not like, if you breathe in nothing but carbon, you die, of course. But as far as like the ecology, the environment, we need carbon dioxide. So they were saying that, there's this theory that if there's more carbon dioxide, that creates more plant life and more oxygen. All right, so let's go back to this here. So again, it's they're basing it on these two reports, but these two reports aren't like the most conclusive thing. So they mentioned in the video the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So yeah, it's like a political organization. So and it's tough to say either way because you're not in the room, you're not conducting the scientific tests. So that's why I'm just like, I don't even know. I don't even know, bro. I don't even know. But all I know is that for sure the sun produces the heat. When it's daytime, it's warm. It's warmer than nighttime. It's, you know, kind of common sense, right? It's hotter, you know, at the equator than it is at the North Pole. And the Earth has gone through so many cycles, so many changes, as the video said, that there was ice ages before, there was warm periods before. You know, they say that, you know, they're saying that their study shows that there was global warming since the 1800s. There was other studies that said there was global cooling at a certain point. I mean, there's so many people saying different things that it's just tough for me to like latch on to anything regarding science like so, you know, vehemently as people have been doing so in the media and with this whole push for this stuff. So here's some other things that the report asserts. Global warming at or above 2 degrees Celsius beyond pre-industrialized levels will cause mass migration from the regions most affected by climate change. More than 500 billion in lost annual economic output in the United States by the year 2100. Wildfires, a loss of more than 99% of the coral reefs. More than 350,000 people exposed to deadly heat stress. $1 trillion of public infrastructure and coastal real estate damage. Global temperatures must be kept below 1.5. Global reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from human sources of 40 to 60% from 2010 levels. Blah blah blah. So they say a bunch of stuff there. Whereas the United States, having emitted 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions, must take a leading role. So the argument is that because this is happening and because the United States is responsible for much of these emissions, we should take a role. Okay. So the United States is currently experiencing several related crises. So these are, you know, these are legit problems. Especially the clean water, like we mentioned in Flint, Michigan, is not has not been addressed. Clean air, you know, definitely in big cities like in New York City here, there, you know, you can tell the air isn't as clean as it is upstate, you know, and I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be with all the cars and stuff, but you know, and car technology has pretty much stayed the same since it was created. It's not much different. You just put gas in, it combusts the engine, you know. So there is, you know, and there are advances being made with cars. There's, you know, these electric cars that are becoming more and more prevalent. My only issue with those are that cars are becoming more and more complicated and more reliant on computer technology, which, you know, any computer is susceptible to being hacked. And you know, we talked about that, I believe last week. We talked about how you can hack into somebody's car using the technology that is already in there, you know, the entertainment system and stuff that links up with you know, your radio or OnStar. It has a cell phone signal, so if you have a cell phone signal or Wi-Fi signal, that can be hacked. A 4-decade trend of economic stagnation, deindustrialization, and anti-labor policies. So I agree with this, that there was a lot of deindustrialization. Even Trump kind of ran on this idea that, you know, there hasn't been, you know, the manufacturing in the country, you know, pretty much has been disappearing, and that, you know, it would benefit our country if we manufactured more things within the country. anti-labor policies. So this one, I would like to know, I kind of need more details on this. Which anti-labor policies would you say that is? I mean, possibly like the monopolies I've been forming, like FANG and stuff like that with Google and Facebook and Microsoft buying up all kinds of companies. I guess you could argue that's part of the anti-labor policies. Just allowing those things to happen, and then allowing corporations to send their money, park their money in the Cayman Islands and get tax breaks and things like that. Hourly wages overall stagnating. Yeah, this is very true. With inflation, we haven't really, gone up. Our wages haven't really gone up. So with inflation, the Federal Reserve, which Ron Paul was talking about earlier, keeps printing money, and that makes the dollar worth less. So even though you might be making $60,000 today, that might be worth only $40,000 in 1995 money. So our money is devalued over time. So even if you get a raise, it doesn't necessarily mean you're making more money, because then prices rise on milk and rent and things like that, and it's not like you're getting any extra things. You're maybe just getting the same things, or maybe even less. The third worst level of socioeconomic mobility in the developed world before the Great Recession. I kind of disagree with this. Third worst level of socioeconomic mobility. I feel like our country has one of the greatest opportunities for socioeconomic mobility. If not, why does everybody want to move here? Why do people immigrate over here? It's because they have an opportunity to make something of themselves. My parents were both immigrants. My father came from Romania while it was still under communist rule, and my mother from Dominican Republic, which was under its own, kind of tyranny and stuff like that, and poverty. So both of them came from impoverished countries, and wanted to make something better of themselves. And you can say that, yeah, they accomplished that. They made, they were much more successful here than they would have been in their respective countries. That's for sure. So I disagree with this. I think you're going to see throughout this document they really play off of the social injustice thing. As in the first video we saw, it's about the document covers jobs, social injustice, and environment, I guess was the third one, right? The erosion of the earning and bargaining power of workers. Okay, so this is valid because it is a lot harder to unionize and get people together. It's arguable whether unions are best for the economy and things like that, but I think people should have the freedom to do that if they want to. Let's see. Inadequate resources for public sector workers to confront the challenges of climate change. Yeah, so what does that mean exactly, inadequate resources? I mean, obviously it means money, but what does that mean to confront the challenges of climate change at the state and federal levels? Does that mean we need to tax people more to have more money to address these things? And I think that's what we're going to see moving forward here. 3, the greatest income inequality since the 1920s. Again, I don't know about that. Because I feel like there's been more equality now than there has ever been. I mean, there's every group, every racial group, both men and women, are succeeding in our economy, becoming more and more equal over time. Let's look over here. Let's see. What was it saying? Okay. U.S. income inequality study. Inequality. You know what it is though? They might be talking about how the rich, basically the richest of the rich, are becoming more and more rich, but the standard of living for most Americans, I feel like, has increased. I could be wrong. A new study from Stanford and Harvard proves that U.S. inequality goes deeper than class for decades. Focus. They say it is counterproductive to focus on inequality between races, and instead it is better to consider the inequality between all of America's poor and its rich, increasingly rich elite. Intergenerational economic mobility for 20 million shows that when it comes to racial inequality, primarily between black and white, class can explain the gap. Okay, study focus on upward, which puts them in a pass at clothing. So, wide and persistent income inequality gap over time. Moved from the from top to bottom quintile of U.S. household income. It's a lot of data. A lot of data to parse through. I did see a chart that showed like the income inequality has risen in every state since the 1970s. Oh, maybe this is more true than I thought. I guess because the top 1% captured half or more of all income growth. So in that sense, but I wouldn't say, like, as far as like the average person, I feel like the average person, you know, no matter the race, has more of a chance, more of an equal chance to become a success compared to each other, you know, within the same class than they did, you know, back in the day. All right. So anyways, let's continue. There's some more things I have to look into. Let's see. So because the top 1% of earners are accruing 91% of the gains, so that's a well-known thing, that the top 1% are gaining more and more of the wealth. And that might be what they're referring to right there. A large racial wealth divide, accounting to a difference of 20 times more wealth between the average white family and the average black family. The system is not geared in favor of non-white people, but I feel like over time it has increasingly become more fair. I have to look into that a little bit more, but I don't doubt that white families have more wealth because they've had the head start. They had, you know, their rights before the non-whites, a lot. Although many white people have immigrated. Many white families have immigrated, like my father did, from outside the country, and had nothing to do with the start of this country. Gender earnings gap. See, now the gender earnings gap. Now this is something that I have looked into more, because so the liberal perspective is that when it comes to the gender earnings gap, is that there's some kind of gender discrimination, but there have been studies that show that big part of that reason is that women have to, women give birth, they go on maternity leave, things like that. That's a factor why they get less. Also, they tend to work less hours than men. according to the studies. And they tend to do less dangerous jobs. So like, you know, I don't know, construction, or, you know, like the guys that do the window wiping on like the skyscrapers. Like that's a dangerous ass job. They get paid a lot of money though, even though it's like, you know, just manual labor. But there's, you know, or like the guys who go on top of like those huge cell phone towers and repair them and stuff. Those are really dangerous, risky jobs that most women don't get into. Also in the tech industry, like I think it has a lot to do with how culture, you know, our society hasn't really reinforced the idea through media and TV shows until like very recently that, you know, technology is cool for girls, and like, you know, but it still is generally a struggle to find you know, competent female you know, software engineers and things like that. Like it's still like there's still a lot of work to be done if they want to pursue that. But you know, men and women are not the same. We're built a little bit differently biologically, right? And so our minds are also built differently. Women's minds are more built for cooperation with other people and understanding, things like that. Men's minds are more designed as like, you know, leadership, kind of like taking charge, completing goals, you know, kind of stuff like that. So you can look into that kind of research if you want to. But so I think that lends to the idea that, you know, there's just different jobs that are more suited for men than there are for women, and vice versa. You know, there's some industries that women dominate completely, like nursing, and the industry that I'm in is nonprofit education. There's women all over that. It's super dominated by women. And the past and in fact, like the past few jobs I've had, in my supervisors were women. So in my mind, I don't see, you know, I don't really see that gap. I think it's another, I think it's something to increase the divide. Divide and conquer is a classic tactic for people in power to keep the average citizen, you know, divided, so that they're more easily controlled. If you can just say like, hey, you know, you shouldn't like this group of people because of this, or you shouldn't like this group of people because of that, then you can't become stronger to, you know, make a real change in the government. And, you know, we see what's happening now in Paris with the Yellow Vest movement, and, you know, it's not being talked about in our news really that much. So basically the idea is that both the left and the right in France and other European countries have come together in realization that these corporations and banks are, and like the UN and European Union, they're going against the citizens' interests, and that's why they've been protesting for like the past month or two, because they don't agree with the government's policies. So it's not just France, but it started in France, but now it's like many parts of Europe. You know, they're fed up with the, you know, flood of immigration from the Middle East. You know, high taxes is another big issue that they're dealing with over there. So it's only when we can all get together under one cause that we can make a big difference. Okay, so whereas climate change, pollution, and environmental destruction have exacerbated systemic racial, regional, social, environmental, and economic injustices. So this is a big part of this document. It's addressing this social injustice, and that's just music to the ears of many a liberal. You know, there is some logic to this, as they define the injustices that are put against a group of people that include indigenous communities, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth, referred to in this preamble as frontline and vulnerable communities. So this makes sense that these communities should be kept in mind when any law is made in this country in order for things to be fair for all people. Ideally, if we didn't have special interests, you know, lining pockets, you know, politicians would be more sensitive to these demographics. But so they basically with this document, they're tying social injustice with climate change, though. So whereas climate change constitutes a direct threat to the national security of the United States, whereas the federal government-led mobilizations during World War II and the New Deal created the greatest middle class that the United States have ever seen. So we discussed kind of how it's debatable whether, you know, the New Deal actually dragged out the Great Depression or if it cured the Great Depression. So they refer to that right there. Whereas the House of Representatives recognizes that a new national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization, there's opportunity to create millions of good, high-wage jobs in the United States. Hey, that sounds great. High-wage jobs. Awesome, right? To provide unprecedented levels of prosperity and economic security for all people of the United States. Hey, that's great, isn't it? For all people? That sounds great, right? To counteract systematic injustices. Yes, those all sound like great goals. Those are great goals that, you know, if you're doing your job as a government, you know, hey, these are great goals to have, right? But how do you get those things done, right? How do you ensure unprecedented levels of prosperity and economic security for all people? How do you do that? How do you end these systemic injustices? Okay, so that's the sense of the House of Representatives, that it is the duty of the federal government to create the deal, a fair and just transition. So what they're saying here, so achieve a net zero greenhouse gas emissions, a fair and just transition. So what they're thinking is that a lot of the way our economy works will have to be completely overhauled within this 10-year deal, which if you have any idea of how fast government works, 10 years is really not a long time to get things done. And it's kind of reminiscent of, like, you know, communist leaders and their like multi-year plans or something like that. Like Mao had like a 7-year plan, or Stalin had like a somewhat year plan. I don't know what the exact number is. You can look that up, but I mean, it's the idea that the government is going to be controlling everything, just about, which, in my opinion, is not a good idea, because government, again, is run by special interests, and they mismanage money. They spend a lot of money on things that they don't, you know, aren't really used efficiently. Just in the military, they spend a lot of money on projects that they never even use, you know, laser weapons and, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. Let's see. Good high-wage jobs and ensure prosperity and economic security for all people. So the thing is, for all people, this is literally the promise of communism, that all people can be wealthy, that all people can be prosperous. But the thing is, when you the thing is that, and we're going to go into this deeper because there's other points, is that if you're making sure everybody is making good money no matter what, what's the incentive to do a good job at your job? So this creates unproductivity, I think, to try to guarantee all these things for everybody. I feel that in order to have innovation and, to have great services, there needs to be some level of competition. Okay, so to invest in the infrastructure and industry of the United States. So this is another thing I'm kind of skeptical about, because I don't think, I'm wary of the government investing our money into businesses. Because a lot of these politicians, they have stock, or they're friends with, or they hold shares in, or hold percentages of companies that could benefit from this. I think it was Harry Reid that doesn't he have like a company or something? There was this issue of like he wanted
Here we go. Linda Joy. This is a matter of fairness and equity, and we remain disappointed that Cliven Bundy continues to not comply with the same laws that 1,600 public lands ranchers do every year, Corns said. After 20 years and multiple court orders to remove the trespass cattle, Mr. Bundy owes the American taxpayers in excess of $1 million. The BLM will continue to work to resolve the matter administratively and judicially. Very interesting. 16,000 Americans. Donna in Albuquerque.
Basically, Harry, the deal. This was years ago. Harry Reid wanted to authorize the building of solar panels on private land. Well, it was kind of debatable whether that was private land or not. The whole Bundy situation. The thing was, what's this? Let's talk about it. Recognized 9 years ago that connections between his official duties and lobbying activities. Okay, this might address what I'm thinking about that I had heard about before. So lobbying activities of his relatives could lead to ethical questions. So he has relatives that are lobbyists. In 2003, the Nevada Democrat publicly banned relatives from lobbying him or his staff after newspaper reports showed that Nevada industries and institutions routinely turned to Reid's sons or son-in-law for representation. Now, questions surrounding family ties are flaring again in Nevada around Senate Majority Leader. He and his oldest son, Rory, are both involved in an effort by a Chinese energy giant, ENN Energy Group, to build a $5 billion solar farm and panel manufacturing plant in the southern Nevada desert. So China is our biggest competitor, and they buy up a lot of land, they build a lot of things here in the United States. They kind of like slowly buying up the United States. They pretty much own Hollywood. So is this really working within the best interests of the citizens if he is making this deal with a Chinese power plant here? Okay, $5 billion solar farm and panel manufacturing plant. Reid has been one of the project's most prominent advocates, helping recruit the company during a 2011 trip to China and applying his political muscle on behalf of the project in Nevada. So that's just an example. These politicians, they always have like some side stuff going on that is a conflict of interest. Okay, so to secure for all people, United States, this stuff, okay, we talked about the air, the water, the climate, community resiliency. I'm not sure what that even means, right? It's kind of broad. Healthy food. Access to nature. So here's the thing about access to nature. What does that mean when they say access to nature? Because the United States owns a lot of land, a whole lot of land that we're not allowed to access. And so
in 2016,
is this bill saying that we need to take more land for the federal government?
Men occupied an Oregon federal wildlife refuge as a protest against federal land ownership. This follows two events. The first was a case where ranchers set fire to federal land, leading to what some considered excessive punishment. The other concerned the two Bundy brothers leading the occupying armed group. Their father, Cliven Bundy, refused to pay grazing fees while using federal land, leading to a standoff with the U.S. Bureau of Land Management in 2014. Many of his supporters believe that the federal government has overstepped its bounds by controlling roughly half the land in the western United States. So, should the U.S. government own so much land? Well, today the federal government holds between 29 and 81% of the land in 12 western states and roughly 640 million acres throughout the U.S. in total. The Bureau of Land Management, as well as other managing federal agencies, frequently run up against those who believe the land should be available to them. Laws like the 1862 Homestead Act intended to give land to those who were willing to settle and work on it. But the government realized that certain land-granting policies were being defrauded by those rich enough to grab huge tracts of land. In 1891, President Benjamin Harrison made it possible to set aside federal land on behalf of the American public rather than giving it away. In particular, ranchers such as Cliven Bundy have long used federal land for grazing cattle. However, environmental concerns throughout the 20th century led to stricter regulations of land usage and the introduction of grazing fees. Bundy argued that because the land is also purposed for hiking and...
So we can see here how much land the United States government owns. So you can see here, yeah, most of, I mean, look at, this is Nevada right here. Yeah, this is Nevada, right? Is that Nevada? I'm such a retard. I'm such a retard. Hold on a second. I just want to be accurate here. Yeah, that is Nevada. I should know because I freaking drove through there last week. I mean, last year. Yeah. So that's like most of Nevada. And so I've driven through actually. So yeah, I went on a trip from last summer. I went to Phoenix. Then I drove up to the Grand Canyon. It's like a four-hour drive or something like that. And then I drove from up there. Is it? Where's my cursor? You see it? So I drove up from like the Grand Canyon, up and around through Utah, down to Vegas, where I dropped off the rental car. And yeah, there's just like vast amounts of land. There's just like emptiness everywhere, and it's beautiful. But like a lot of it's just like flat nothingness. That's like, you know, is there anything really going on there? And maybe there's not. I don't know, because, you know, I mean, should the federal government own all this land? Own all this? I don't know. It's a lot, right? It's like, you know, a good like third of the United States, it seems like. So anyways, access to nature. Does that mean that they're going to you know, they're going to use eminent domain to take more land? What is, you know, okay, sustainable environment. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean you're going to ban gas cars and we're going to have to all get electric cars? Is that what that means? It's very vague. A sustainable environment. What do you mean exactly? To promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing historic oppression. So, you know, I'm for promoting equity and justice and things like that. I'm just a little bit concerned that this is a climate bill and that social injustice is like a huge part of it. I don't know. There's definitely some work to be done as far as equity, but I think, again, if you take out the special interests, the banks, you know, you break up some of these huge ass companies like Google, using antitrust laws. You know, you can make things fair for everybody, and not have to make it kind of like a race thing or whatever. Like, you know, this is this thing that liberals push a lot to divide people. And you can say is the same thing for certain right-wing people. Like they're, you know, they are, you know, sometimes racist themselves, or at least racially insensitive, but the liberals do that as well. As we saw with Northam last week, we were talking about Northam and how he dressed up as a black person with blackface. Okay. What are we? I'm getting off track here. Okay. So, the Green New Deal goals should be accomplished through a 10-year national mobilization. 10 years. Man, the government wouldn't be able to, even if everybody was all for it, I don't think the government could do half of these things in 10 years that they're going to be proposing. So, building resiliency against climate change related disasters. Okay, what does that mean? It's another vague kind of thing. Community defined projects and strategies. I like that this term is put in to this document, because I believe that the local governments should have more power than the federal government. But this bill isn't doing that. It's just saying it's going to consider community defined projects and strategies. It's still kind of vague, Ideally, the state should have, more power than the federal government, in my opinion, and that the local governments, city governments, town governments should have more power as well. Let's see. Repairing and upgrading the infrastructure by eliminating pollution and greenhouse gas emissions as much as technologically feasible. I gotta say, man, like I really think that they want to ban gas cars, and that's going to be a bit of a problem for a lot of people. What are you going to do with all those cars, first of all? All right, so guaranteeing universal access to clean water. This is a legit thing. Like this should be a thing. Okay, people deserve to get some freaking water. You can't just let people die out in the street. Like there should be clean water available. You should be able to walk into any establishment and like, hey, let me get a glass of water. They give you a glass of water. I totally am for that. Reducing the risks posed by flooding and other climate impacts. Okay, yes. Meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources. 100% in 10 years. So all the power plants that don't have clean, renewable energy have to get shut down. Does this also include nuclear energy? Because nuclear energy, we have power plants in the United States that are falling apart that could have a Fukushima type incident at one of our power plants that would just completely, Fukushima is another thing, man. The radiation that poured out of there is much bigger issue than I think this idea of climate change, because it's affected a lot of the sea life, and we've gotten radiation on the West Coast that came from Fukushima, and we have a bunch of power plants that in our country that could break down, and hey boy, all right, I got you. All right, there you go. Could break down, and we'd have a big problem. Okay, smart power grids. That's a big issue right there. Smart power grids. That means connectivity to the internet. That's all that means right there. And with smart power grids, it'd be easier to spy on you. There's technology that you could use even power sources to spy on people, light bulbs to spy on people, like the new high-tech light bulbs that connect to Wi-Fi. They can be used to spy on you. Basically anything that connects to Wi-Fi, we got to be wary about it. And also the EMF radiation that comes from Wi-Fi. So if you're just like sitting and baking in Wi-Fi coming from everything, all this radiation, all these waves are interacting with your DNA and scrambling things around, which we don't know the full effect of as of yet. A lot more studies need to be made on that. Upgrading. See, now this is like one of the more comical parts of this. Upgrading all existing buildings in the United States and building new buildings to achieve maximal energy efficiency, water efficiency, safety, affordability, comfort, and durability, including through electrification. So you're gonna upgrade all the buildings in the United States? I mean, I don't even know how many buildings are there in the United States. You're gonna get all that fixed in 10 years? I mean, it took like about 10 years to build the Freedom Tower after 9/11. It took a long ass time. So you're talking about you're gonna upgrade all the buildings in the United States? So that has me thinking, like, is this just like one of those negotiation tactics where you just like you offer something completely ridiculous so that you get something more reasonable through negotiation? I think that's might be what this is. I don't think AOC herself is really believing that she can do all this. I mean, if she does, then clearly there's something wrong with her logic. Spurring massive growth in clean manufacturing in the United States, removing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. So this means more taxes, more regulation on industry, which could hurt industry, hurt our economy. Working collaboratively with farmers and ranchers in the United States to eliminate pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector. So what does this mean exactly? I mean, cows, their poop gives off methane, which also pollutes the air. Does this mean we're going to be taxing animals? Like one proposal was to tax pets? Tax pet ownership? Someone had proposed taxing how your pet is contributing to global warming. There's an article there, but no one is talking about. Look at this. OneGreenPlanet.org. There's one industry that deserves a carbon tax, but no one's talking about it. Carbon taxes. That's the whole thing, bros. The premise behind a carbon tax is pretty straightforward. If you wish to dump pollution into the environment, then you will be taxed for doing so. We exhale carbon. We could be potentially taxed for breathing. Just keep that in mind. But the idea behind the tax is to deter companies from removing more fossil fuels from the earth to feed a never-ending demand for energy. Blah, blah, blah. What is it talking about with the livestock? Okay, for the most part, the countries that have instated a carbon tax only place a price on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with burning fossil fuels. British Columbia's carbon tax excludes the agriculture industry, as does Australia. Ireland's carbon tax does include the agricultural industry. However, this is associated to the emissions related to the fossil fuels. Okay, get to the point that you're trying to make. Burning fossil fuels is largely unchecked manner. Amount of carbon attributed to livestock production is completely quantifiable, and sources of excess emissions. Livestock production is responsible for 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And these numbers are projected to grow as more and more developing countries shift to a Western diet that revolves around the consumption of animal products. So, could this even be saying that we need to tax? Yeah, I mean, if you have X amount of cows, we have to tax you X amount of dollars per cows, maybe even banning livestock in some cases. Who knows? Supporting family farming. Now this is, now here is something that I totally agree with, especially with Monsanto, GMOs, the whole idea of, that kind of stuff. Supporting family farming, but who's to say that they don't require these family farms to use GMOs? let's say, okay, I'm going to give you $5,000 a year or $5,000 a season, but you have to use GMO seeds. And that could totally happen because Monsanto has lobbies the government as huge. It's the biggest producer of GMOs, big powerful company. They lobby the government all the time, and especially if this is going to be put together by pieces of bills from other politicians. You can bet Monsanto is going to sneak its way in there because the whole idea of GMOs is to have sustainable food system. If you farm fish, you can save the wild fish, all this stuff that you can produce more if you make them GMO. But studies have shown that it's questionable whether the GMOs are good for your body. I mean, I don't know. My initial thought is, why would I want to scientifically alter what grows out of the ground? Like, I don't think that's good for us. Like, instinctually, I don't think that's good for us, even without the studies in mind. Okay, by investing in sustainable farming and land use practices that increase soil health. So that, I think, is what they're trying to say, is that they're going to be taxing livestock, in some cases maybe even banning livestock and forcing people to go vegan, basically, when beef is like $20 a pound or something. People are going to have really no choice. By building a more sustainable food system that ensures universal access to healthy food. So this, to me, yeah, man, it screams GMOs, man. Overhauling transportation systems. Yes, we do need to overhaul these transportation systems. A lot of the infrastructure in the United States is falling apart. Bridges that are just, they're due for getting, for falling apart and things like that. Again, the power plants, the nuclear power plants that need to be updated and fixed. Zero emission vehicle infrastructure and manufacturing. So there it is, zero emissions. So that means bye-bye gas cars, no more gas cars, electric cars only from now on. Yeah, that car you just bought, you're gonna have to get rid of it. Probably you'll have to pay for it to get demolished. I don't know. Or, like, how can you implement this in 10 years? Zero emission vehicle infrastructure. Guys, what do you think about this? Corey, what do you think about this? Zero emission vehicle infrastructure and manufacturing. How are we going to do this in 10 years? Everybody's going to have a Tesla in 10 years? Clean, affordable, and accessible public transportation. I like this idea. Good public transportation is needed in New York City. The MTA is basically falling apart. We're just the, a big mistake away from a total crisis here in the United States. Here in New York City, because if the trains stop running, then the economy dies. Then we're gonna have a huge crisis. It's gonna be chaos. High-speed rail, high-speed rail. We need more of that. China, Japan, Korea, they're way more advanced with the high-speed rail than we are. Mitigating, managing long-term adverse health, economic, and other effects of pollution and climate change, including by providing funding for community-defined projects and strategies. So this is kind of vague. I'm not too sure about that. But hey, which community is defining it? Is it like, a district in a city that gets to define this? Is it the city themselves? Is it the state? Who defines this? Who is the community? Which community? Removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and reducing pollution. Which, again, pollution, I do believe we need to reduce. Smog and stuff like that is not good, although I think we've come a long way. All right. Restoring natural ecosystems through proven low-tech solutions that increase soil carbon storage, such as preservation and afforestation. So again, does this mean we're going to be taking land from people and making it public land? you know, there's this movie, Logan's Run, where people only live in these bubble cities, or, well, actually, there was only one bubble city that they showed in the movie, but it was like, you know, within the society, you know, no one escapes the bubble city, and every, you know, the propaganda is that, oh, if you go outside the bubble, you die, that, you know, you have to live in this society or else, you know, you're screwed, basically. So, you know, that's kind of an extreme thing, but, you know, doesn't this kind of lead towards that, where the government owns all, like, the natural land, and we're already being kind of shoveled into cities and things like that, because that's where the jobs are. So could that be the future of America, just a bunch of mega cities? Okay, restoring and protecting threatened, endangered, and fragile ecosystems through locally appropriate and science-based projects that enhance biodiversity and support climate resiliency. I gotta give it to her that, you know, there are a lot of mentions of local and local communities, things like that. If that, but I just don't necessarily trust the federal government to hand power to local communities. I really don't believe that they would. Okay, cleaning up existing hazardous waste and abandoned sites. Sure, yes, this is a good thing. And we're getting towards the end. I'm kind of, my back is hurting. I'm kind of fading out a little bit. Bear with me. Let me stretch. Oh my God. Okay. All right. Okay. Whew. Okay. All right. Identifying other emission and pollution sources and creating solutions to eliminate them. I'll be right with you, Roscoe. Okay. Promoting the international exchange of technology. Okay. Okay. Help other countries achieve a Green New Deal. Okay, I understand that it, you know, the positive intent that could be behind this, because the pollution in other countries affects us, such as what happened with Fukushima, and, you know, with the jet streams and things like that. Pollution carries all across the globe. But I also don't like foreign intervention. We shouldn't. I mean, we can create new deals and, you know, new treaties. We could do things like that. Maybe that's what they're talking about. But, you know, I don't necessarily think we should be giving them money. We already give $50 billion to foreign entities. Okay, let's see here. A Green New Deal must be developed through transparent, inclusive consultation, collaboration, and partnership with the frontline and vulnerable communities. I like this part. I believe all government should be transparent, right? And it should be inclusive to different groups. It should, you know, we should have accurate representation in government in the first place. Okay, achieve the Green New Deal goals of mobilization, providing and leveraging in a way that ensures that the public receives appropriate ownership stakes and returns on the investment. Leveraging, that word is kind of sketchy to me. That's a little bit sketchy to me. To me, that kind of means like, oh, we're going to kind of press people. We're going to pressure people. We're going to put the pressure on. So, and this whole idea here, you know, is this communism? Because the whole idea behind communism is that, oh, you know, instead of the rich owning most of the stuff, everybody owns an equal share. But then what that turns out into being is that, you know, if we look through history, communist regimes and stuff like that, everybody just ends up poor. Okay, we all make the same, we all receive the same stuff, but we're all poor. Other than the, you know, the political elites within the communist governments, which would, you know, find ways to get money into their own coffers, like in Romania. Ceausescu, or whatever the hell that guy's name was, who was running communist Romania, he built this huge palace, like one of the biggest buildings in the world for the government, you know, huge palace. Like, and this country was like, you know, a lot of people starving and a lot of poverty, and, you know, still under communism created this huge structure, and actually got to visit it in 2017, and I saw it. It was just massive, and it's like, you know, a lot of empty rooms, and like, what do you even put in these rooms? You know, huge, massive rooms. Ensuring that the federal government takes into account the complete environmental and social costs and impacts of emissions. So again, we're, you know, tying social injustice with climate change. Ensuring that frontline and vulnerable communities shall not be adversely affected, you know, so that's good equity right there. Providing resources, training, and high quality education to all people. So here is something that, you know, does this include the rich? Should the rich also get free education? I mean, if you can afford it, should they be giving it to them? Also, I mean, college was free at one point in this country for everybody. And then eventually they had to start charging for it. And college is kind of a racket now. You pay so much money, you go into so much debt. I have a friend who's like $100-something thousand in debt. And, you know, that's got to be, you know, I personally went to City College, so, you know, I went to a CUNY, so I don't have the debt. You know, we paid that all off because it wasn't as much. But you've got people going to like $50,000 a year colleges, and, you know, are they really getting their money's worth when they get out of there? A lot of people that have, you know, even master's degrees aren't really making what they should be making. I mean, I you know, looking for a new job right now, and I see some jobs that are like, you know, master's required, but then it doesn't even really pay that much more than, you know, if you just had like a 4-year degree or something like that. But I think this is another just unrealistic thing that I don't know if it's, I mean, the fact that we had college, I think up until associate's degree in this country, you know, maybe we can do that. But, you know, to say that even higher you know, like all education, what, including a master's degree too, is going to be paid by the government. That's going to cost a lot of money. And again, good luck with prying the money away from the military-industrial complex, the, you know, defense budget. I'm sure, you know the Pentagon, DOD, they're not gonna allow that. They're not gonna say like, hey, okay, yeah, take $200 billion away from our budget. No, that's not gonna. I don't really see that happening. Although, you know, we do overspend a lot on the military. It's just that, you know, Boeing and you know, what are the other ones? I forget them. Those big companies that build all the weapons and tanks and shit. They have so much power. Making public investments in the research and development. So one thing that the government is good at, I think, is research. I think the research capabilities of our government are pretty good, so I don't mind that they invest money into researching things. Just when you put money into businesses that are trying to make money, that's where the line is a little bit blurry. When you give subsidies and tax breaks to private companies. Directing investments to spur economic development. So again, you know, government mismanages money all the time. Special interests, we've been talking about that this whole time as well. Ensuring the use of democratic and participatory processes that are inclusive of and led by frontline and vulnerable communities. Again, like more inclusivity with traditionally disenfranchised groups, which is good. You know, there should be more of that. So that's one of the few good things that I see in this bill, in this resolution, this proposal here. Okay, so union jobs. They want to create more union jobs. So the issue with that, okay, so unions typically vote Democratic, so it's in their best interest to strengthen unions. Unions are also often associated with mafia and political machinations that can hurt citizens. For example, New York City, it costs more to build here than anywhere else in the world. You know, like there's so much money that is just basically just embezzled out of the government when they make a contract with people to build something. The contractors charge so much money, and you could bet that the politicians get some of that back in their back pocket or whatever. Guarantees wage and benefit parity for workers. This literally means equal pay for everybody, or is it all for all union workers? So despite your level of productivity, let's say, let's take Corey as an example. Let's say he's a top worker in his company. He's like gets worker of, employee of the year all the time. He's always on time for work. He always does everything. He finishes his job early and always has time to finish everything and helps everybody. He's the perfect employee, right? But then you have, let's say, Bob. Bob is like the worst employee in the company. He comes in late all the time. He takes super long lunch breaks. He's on Facebook all the time during work. But he gets paid the exact same amount as you? Would that then encourage you to continue being the best worker, or would that make you kind of just like, hey, fuck it, I'll be like Bob then? Fucking Bob's got the secret recipe. He's chilling and still making as much money as everybody else. Government provides the jobs, guaranteeing a job. So with a family-sustaining wage. So this is, how realistic is this when we're $21 trillion in debt? A lot of people, there's people that don't want to work. There's people that, they just don't have, the work ethic to be, to be a productive worker. But you're saying here that you're going to guarantee a job. So in New York City, a family sustaining wage would be like $60,000 a year. And somewhere like Silicon Valley, that'd be like $100-something thousand. So how are we going to work that out where everybody can sustain a family and everybody has a job? So these are things that you got to question and wonder. Okay, it sounds great. It sounds great. Hey, I don't have a job right now. I would love a job, a high-paying, family-sustaining wage. Sure, yes, that'd be great. But is it realistic? We can't just take things at face value and be like, oh, this is what they're saying. It must be true. It must be possible. Well, politicians, they are paid liars. They're paid, their role is to gain more power and more money. Like, that's why people go into politics. People don't really go into politics to help people. They go there so they can have power, they can have money. And most politicians, I feel, are like some kind of sociopath or psychopath, especially the more high-ranking ones like Pelosi and Schumer and Trump and all these high-ranking people, Biden, they're all they all put on a good face, but that they're paid. They're actors. They're paid to put on to put on a good face. Okay, strengthening and protecting the right of all workers to organize, unionize. So what does that mean exactly? Will the government, U.S. government, broker these deals between unions? I don't know. Strengthening and enforcing the labor. Increase government bureaucracy in this? Strengthening and enforcing labor, workplace health and safety, anti-discrimination. That sounds like more bureaucracy, more agencies, more government workers, when the goal should be, more private workers, because that means more competition, more innovation. If you go, it's a common meme that, at any government job that, people kind of just like sitting on their ass and like not really working that hard. I actually interned at the Department of Consumer Affairs in New York City, and people were kind of like that. They were kind of just like real chill, and like once it's 5 o'clock, they're out the fucking door. Like, nah, fuck. as it kind of should be, I guess. But sometimes, you know, if there's pressing matters, you know, sometimes there's work to be done. But the thing is, when you're in a government job, you're kind of like guaranteed that spot. It's hard to get fired from a government job. Once you're in, you're kind of like just in there. Enacting and enforcing trade rules, procurement standards, blah, blah, blah. Stop the transfer of jobs. See, stopping the transfer of jobs overseas, I agree with that. Pollution overseas. What does that mean? To stop the transfer of pollution overseas? Or like stop pollution from coming here from overseas? I'm guessing that's what that means. If that's what it means, I agree with it. To grow domestic manufacturing in the United States. This is a good thing, yes. Ensuring that public lands, waters, and oceans are protected. So, again, the United States already owns a whole lot of public land. So, this kind of implies that they want to protect more of the land, to take over more of the land, and this further supports that idea because they go into eminent domain, and that eminent domain will not be abused. Okay, it's kind of contradictory to what they've been talking about, protecting the land and forcing people or having people change up their house and their business and everything like that. It seems like eminent domain will be very much abused if they're going to be assigning new public land and things like that. Obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous people. Yes, this is good. We should honor our treaties with the indigenous peoples and all that. They've been screwed over much too long. Ensuring a commercial environment where every business person is free from unfair competition and dominated by domestic or international monopolies. So international monopolies we definitely should stay away from. We should stay away from foreign influence. Ensuring a commercial environment where every business person is free from unfair competition. So this is a little bit questionable in that it seems like, you know, if it's like enforcing existing antitrust laws, which they haven't really been doing, that's good. But I'm kind of wary of additional regulation that is not currently on the books. They need to be using the laws that are there because I think they're pretty much sufficient. They help break up like the oil barons of like the early 1900s and stuff. Providing all people of the United States with high quality health care, so universal health care. So that's one thing that I don't know, that'll cost a lot of money, and not everybody with universal health care and countries with universal health care have had the best experience.
Some in Congress say they're moving closer to a plan that'll make health care cheaper and better. Sounds great. But when government takes charge, it can also mean innovation stops, and you may not get the breakthroughs and care that you need to save your life.
Affordable health care for every single American. That's what we're called upon to do.
Care for everyone for less money. Critics say that just isn't possible.
The only way they can get costs down under a government-run system is to control the amount of money that is spent on health care. But there's much more of a demand for health care than the government is willing to pay for. And so we will have long waits for care, just like they do in Canada and in Great Britain.
Those countries do have problems.
The nationwide shortage of NHS dentists.
In England, people wait just to register for a dentist.
Hundreds of people queued
Waits are
around.
so long, some people do it themselves. He used super glue. Some pull their own teeth, dental tools, pliers, and vodka.
What do we want?
Patients protest because the health service won't pay for drugs they say they need. The president says he doesn't want that.
When you hear the naysayers claim that I'm trying to bring about government-run health care, know this, they're not telling the truth.
But once he did say that if he were starting from scratch,
I would probably go with a single-payer system.
He says he doesn't want government-run health care.
He does want government health care. He just wants to go about it in a slow way so people don't realize what's happening to them.
many pundits and economists agree, saying Obama's plan will build a bridge to government-run health care.
And we're all going to face long waiting lists and have lack of access to the latest care.
People line up for care, some of them die, that's what happens.
Canadian doctor David Greitzer, author of The Cure, thought Canada's government health care was great until he started treating patients.
The more time I spent in the Canadian system, the more I came across people waiting for radiation therapy, waiting for the knee replacement so they could finally walk up to the second floor of their house.
So you get the idea that government-run healthcare isn't necessarily the best thing. Guaranteeing healthcare for everybody isn't necessarily the best thing because there's only so many doctors. You know, the system. You know, government is not efficient because it has no one to compete against. You're giving them the money when you pay taxes. You don't really have a choice, or else they'll imprison you. They'll put you in prison if you don't pay up. So you don't really have a choice. So if everybody's accessing the same health care, then, you know, things like that will probably happen, where you'll have to wait a long time for crucial surgery, you know, that could, you know, potentially kill you or something like that. And sometimes they go to different countries to do their to get their procedures done because their system, you know, isn't fast enough, or, you know, stuff like that. All right. Affordable, safe, and adequate housing for everybody. For everybody, right? Universal housing. So the homeless epidemic is crazy in this country. I don't really think the federal government should be handling it. I think it should be the state governments, because some states have bigger problems with homelessness than other states, like, for example, California. So it's really, I think, up to the state government, and a lot of this can be put up to the state government. It should be, you know, it shouldn't be all the federal government fucking running everything, you know, all this centralized power. You know, the more you centralize power, the more corrupt it'll become. So I agree that there's a housing issue, that, you know, people should have a place to live, that there are places for people to live. Like, if we thought outside the box, and, you know, we'd be able to find places to put these homeless people. You know, it's just that, you know, I'm not sure what the solution is to that. I know it is a problem. I just don't know that the federal government should be trying to handle that. Economic security, universal income. So that was something that I heard in the news, but, you know, it's stated here in economic security such. You know, I think I heard somewhere that they were proposing like $10,000. What was it? 10. Oh, this should be interesting. Universal basic income is already in Finland. Let's see how that's working.
I'm in Finland.
It's a much different country, society, much less people, etc., etc.
It's 1 year after the launch of a first-of-its-kind experiment here in the country. We're talking about universal basic income. Here's how it works. Researchers randomly selected 2,000 unemployed people between the ages of 25 and 58 from around Finland. Each month, those 2,000 people receive 560 euros, which is about 670 bucks, tax-free. What they do with the money is entirely up to them. The purpose of the experiment is to address unemployment here in Finland. The government hopes that it will encourage unemployed people to take jobs instead of being afraid of losing their unemployment benefits. So 1 year into the experiment, is it working? We went to Finland to find out. It wasn't easy finding someone who's actually receiving the free money. Researchers are keeping the names of the recipients private to try to keep the results consistent. But we did manage to find Mika Ruusinen on Facebook, and he agreed to meet us at his office in Tampere, about 2 hours north of Helsinki. So, we are going to meet Mika now at his office. He's here, he's agreed to meet us during his lunch break. The fact that we're meeting him at his office is actually a promising sign. It means he has a job, so we'll see what he has to say. Hi, Mika.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
I'm
you
Elizabeth.
too.
Thanks so much for having us here today.
Okay, great, actually.
Let's
go
get
inside.
started. Cool.
Yeah.
Mika was doing an internship at an IT company where he now works full-time when he found out he was selected for Finland's basic income trial. When you first found out that you were going to be part of the trial, did you tell people or did you want to keep it secret?
When I first received the letter, I opened it, I didn't understand it at all, and so I gave it to my wife and asked about her, what the heck is this?
Mika had been unemployed for 16 months before he decided to go back to school to switch career paths into IT. Do you find there's less bureaucracy than there was when you were receiving benefits for being unemployed?
Yeah, definitely, and that's the best part of the basic income, that it would mean much less bureaucracy. People who are using the system are already using the system. The basic income encourages people to do work.
Mika said the 560 euros a month wouldn't be enough to live on, but it's given him flexibility for things like a family vacation or the possibility of starting his own business. He's proud to be part of the experiment in Finland, but he's not sold on the idea that you should continue receiving free cash even when you're well off.
There's no getting out. If I won $1 million at the lottery, they would still give it to me.
It's a pretty weird idea.
Yeah. It's strange.
Our next step was to find out what the researchers think about the universal basic income experiment so far. Kela is the arm of the Finnish government that's implementing the trial. So we are at the office here at Kela in Helsinki. We're about to meet with one of the main researchers now. Researcher Miska Simamainen said he won't actually hear from any of the participants until the trial concludes at the end of 2018. But the experiment has already revealed one of the biggest issues with universal basic income: funding.
We had to make many practical compromises during the design process of the experiment.
Researchers only had enough funding to hand out cash to 2,000 people, and they chose to limit their sample to participants who were unemployed. Do you envision a world where eventually there could be everyone in Finland has universal basic income?
There is a strong consensus between political parties that the current social security system should be reformed.
But we found there is disagreement about how to reform the system. Is the idea that universal basic income is actually going to take the place of some of the other benefits here in Finland.
That's the way that the discussion is, that if we're going to give you universal basic income, then we're going to cut from other sectors.
This is Antti Ohanen. He's the author of a book about welfare in Finland. He sees universal basic income not as a way to replace the current welfare system, but as an added benefit.
Our path shouldn't be to create low-wage jobs, but to really improve education and improve people's skills. And I think giving the kind of freedom that true universal basic income would provide might help with that.
It looks like the trial is off to a good start here, but it still seems like it's a long way away from universal basic income being universal here in Finland.
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely disagree with...
Hey guys, it's Elizabeth.
Giving a universal basic income to everybody, even if you already have a job. Kari says, I understand your arguments. I still don't see a reason to not go for it. Okay, that's fair. Which particular arguments? I've been talking for quite a while. People implementing these policies should also offer solutions for the issues that you have identified, like not enough doctors. Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done. I mean, you can't just force people to become doctors. They have to kind of decide that for themselves, and that goes to the education system. The United States has really been failing our youth as far as STEM, math and science, and there's been a lot of push to get more STEM into schools. So I got to give some credit to the education system, that there has been some effort, you know, in the school system, and especially through nonprofit organizations, through nonprofit education, has added a lot of supplemental help to the education system. And you know, I do like that, even though, you know, it's like, the thing is, it's not run directly by the government, these nonprofit organizations. So it still has a sense of like competition, because you're competing between other nonprofits to get those grants and stuff like that. But the government does maintain a lot of control because they're funding. We're gonna have to wrap this up in a bit here. We're almost done. Okay. 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 Economic security. So, you know, universal health care, universal housing, universal income, access to clean water, clean air. Yeah, we should be getting that. Healthy and affordable food and nature. So again, we discussed some of my skepticisms on that. You know, as far as nature, you know, does that mean the government's going to be seizing more land? As far as food, does that mean there's going to be a big push for GMO and taxing livestock? Okay, so overall, the new Green Deal. Here's my thoughts on it from, you know, from the bit that we've researched and looked at and everything. I think missed your answer to the question. What question? Which question? I don't know. So here's my overall conclusion on this. I see this deal as, you know, on one side I see, well, at face value it looks like it's pushing for a huge increase in the federal government's power, which goes along with a trend since Abraham Lincoln's American system, that the federal government has increased more and more power. I'm of the belief that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the more power that's concentrated into one source, you know, the less power the rest of us have, right? So, I mean, this document talks about, you know, guaranteeing a lot of things, first of all, for everybody. Universal income, universal health care, universal housing. How realistic are those things? How realistic is it to upgrade every single house, every single home in the United States? Is there even a number? How many houses in the United States? Or how many buildings? Because it would seem like they would want all the buildings. What, 5.6 million commercial buildings in 2012? How many buildings are in the United States? $100 million households? There's only really guesstimations here. So it seems like maybe there's 120 buildings in the United States. 120 million buildings. I mean, that's a lot. Like, there isn't even the construction capacity to upgrade all that within 10 years. So that's what has me thinking that maybe this is just, you know, the negotiation tactic of ask for a lot and end up getting what you want, right? So what I do like about this deal, though, is the inclusion of what they call the frontline, you know, the disenfranchised communities that historically have been, you know, not really represented that well in government. It is a little bit troubling how they do try to tie in social injustice with climate change, because the concept of social injustice can be twisted, and I see it used as a divide and conquer tactic, really, to basically distract, the average citizen into thinking that racial inequality is the biggest form of injustice and not class inequality. The lower class, the middle class versus the upper class, the top 1% that own most of everything, that have the power, that push the policies, that are the special interests. AOC or Pelosi, come on, man. Pelosi looks like a mummy, Pelosi looks like a decomposing corpse. She looks like a zombie. Nancy outweighs her on the titty front. Are you serious, bro? Those titties are probably like all saggy, pruny. Come on, man. Obviously, AOC is hot. She's totally bangable, but I think her, as a politician, is not really. I mean, one could argue that maybe she has a good intent here. I just don't think she knows enough about the economy and how government works. And I mean, none of these politicians ever want to acknowledge the debt, the $21 trillion in debt, and the fact that China is buying up a lot of our debt. They're buying a lot of real estate in the country. They're gaining a lot of power over us, a lot of soft power over us, and that's troubling to me. And so while it would be great to give everybody money, give everybody a job, I just don't think that would be the best thing for the country. Because competition is what built this country. When this country started, you didn't have any welfare or anything like that. That was in the early 1900s that they started the whole, I think with FDR, with the New Deal, they started welfare and unemployment insurance and all those things. And while some of those things I do appreciate, I do appreciate having unemployment benefits, it does help. But at the same time, if we didn't have some of the, corruption that we do have in our society, I don't think it would be necessary to have these benefits, because people would have more, there would just naturally be more jobs available, I definitely think there are people that do abuse the systems, like, for example, like the disability benefits and stuff like that. Like, sometimes they'll, exaggerate their condition to get a check. Yeah, Michael Moore said that. Well, Michael Moore isn't really the, he isn't really... What how should I say this? He's not the authority on who should be running for president. I mean, I liked Michael Moore at first, but a lot of things that he said and done just kind of led me to think, like, I don't know about this guy really, but because there wasn't a whole lot of difference between Bush and Obama. And so when Obama got into the power, Michael Moore had nothing bad to say about him, despite a lot of the policies still continuing, like for example, the foreign wars and special interests and stuff like that was still a thing. I mean, Bush and Obama were both funded by Goldman Sachs. I mean, I think Trump is funded by Goldman Sachs too. It's like, it's ridiculous. It's the same, different faces for the same entities, basically. So, my conclusion is that, we'll see what happens with this New Deal. If Congress will vote on it, we'll pass it. If this My assumption is that something milder will come from this. Like there'll be some kind of, like, this was just to start a conversation, and that, you know, we'll be getting, you know, that maybe we'll see a bill that is like a Green Deal light come out or something like that. Because I think that there's going to be a lot of opposition to this, especially, you know, of course, from conservatives, because, you know, it's just not economically sound. This, you know, money doesn't just come out of nowhere. You know, we pay for all the, you know, all the money the government has comes from us, and we're already in huge amount of debt, $21 trillion in debt. You know, so we got to do things that are economically, fiscally responsible, so that I think, you know, the number one thing the federal government should be doing right now is cutting spending, so that they can pay off the debt. They got to figure out ways to pay off the debt, but people don't address that. They don't even talk about that, really. And it's a huge vulnerability. It's a huge problem. It's a way bigger problem than climate change for our country. Yeah, the thing about the Democratic Party is that, you know, it's easy for very few people to take control over the whole thing. We saw that with Hillary Clinton when she stole the nomination from Bernie. But the same could be said for the Republican Party, because like Mitt Romney stole the nomination from Ron Paul. What's up? I must learn English. What's up? I must learn English. You can't win a presidential election without support from the other party. She's too left for Republicans to like. We've been in debt for so long. Yeah, we have been in debt so long. It should be the number one issue, to pay off the debt. All right, guys. So that's about it for today's show. Thank you, Corey, for sticking through and having this conversation with me. Thank you, I Must Learn English, for popping in. Sorry that you came in towards the end of the stream, but my back is killing me, and my dog is dying for my attention. The Sunday morning show, we air every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I Must Learn English, if you'd like to follow and put on notifications, you can get the notification for when the show starts. I also post up the VOD on YouTube as well. So the VOD will be on Twitch, but I also post it on YouTube. You can subscribe to me there. The MC Faceman on YouTube. On Twitter, The MC Faceman. Yeah, I'm going to give my dog